Formerly inaugural Elementary of Irish Studies at the University of Otago, Peter Kuch decided to retire in 2019 to become an emeritus professor. He has an extensive academic background. He graduated from the University of Wales, hold a Master of Literature and a PhD of Philosophy from the University of Oxford.
In the course of his career, multiple times he moved from universities to others as a visiting professor to perform his research that focuses on Irish and Australian modernism, Irish culture and literature, and new projects exploring the cultural history of Irish theatre in New Zealand and Australia. The thesis he will present today at the symposium is Madame Giovanni visits Noumea, or did she? Madame Giovanni, a character from Alexander Dumas' travel writing, is a young woman from the 19th century who traveled across ocean,
birthing in territories such as California or even New Caledonia, or did she?
Thank you very much for the invitation. And after that brilliant presentation, I feel like opening with a song, but I won't. So, anyone reading the abstract of this paper would be excused for asking themselves, why on earth would someone use a 1580 essay by Montaigne to read Madame Giovanni's mid-19th century journal of her travels, as exotic as they were? For that matter, why not go back to the Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494? Or to the bull issued by Pope Alexander VI the previous year, 1493, a bull that became known as the Doctrine of Discovery. The treaty gave expression to an imperial hubris that the world could be divided between dominant European powers. The papal bull, an equally imperial hubris, that people who were not Christian or who would not become Christian could be eliminated. That is, genocide of the heathen was morally defensible. As relevant in an archaeological sense as both the treaty and the papal bull for the long and bloody history of empire, it is Montaigne's essay that is demonstrably relevant to Montaigne's essay that's relevant to my talk, given the narrative structure of the journal. Coming a century after both the treaty and the papal bull, Montaigne's essay, as it were, offers a meditation on the consequences of imperial conquest and a note of caution about reporting on exotic cultures and travel to foreign lands that followed the earliest voyages of discovery. Montaigne is relevant for three reasons. The first paragraph of the essay establishes the need for reason and observation with respect to the unknown, particularly the barbaric. And what Montaigne puts in the essay, talking about Greek perceptions of the Romans and Romans' perceptions of the Greek, his conclusion is by which it appears how cautious men ought to be of taking things upon trust from vulgar opinion, and that we are not to judge by the eye of reason and we are to judge by the eye of reason and not from common report. With Madame Giovanni's journal, the binary opposition of the eye of reason and common report derived from vulgar opinion is the key, or the aporia, to that section of the journal devoted to New Caledonia. So this is the first reason for the relevance of Montaigne. The second concerns his speculation about Atlantis, derived as it is from Plato's Timaeus, and his advice about making claims about its extinct indigenous, such as the hypothetical Celts. But the third reason, and the dominant reason that I'm using Montaigne's essay, is that cannibalism, the topic of his essay, is both a recurrent motif in the journal and a disruptive intertext in the section on New Caledonia. Now, even a cursory reading of the journal reveals that Madame Giovanni is fascinated, haunted, terrified by accounts of cannibalism and by the possibility that she might be eaten. Early in her journal, the recently married mid-20-year-old adventurer recalls an incident that occurred as she was wandering the harbourside markets of Auckland during the late 1840s. That is, at the height of the Maori Wars, 1842 to 1859. Purportedly Tutsil, fascinated by sights and sounds and the mannerisms and dress of the local Maori, she is suddenly accosted. A Maori comes up to her, pinches her by the arm, and says the word maki. And she does not know what this means. And so she asks around, what does it mean? Well, the compliment paid to you by the man in the hat, collar and spurs has a physical, not a moral implication. She's French. She thinks she's being complimented on her elegant dress. You're aware very much that she's aristocratic. Well, she comes across as aristocratic, and she has a air of conducting herself as a person who is in control. And so consequently, this encounter disturbs her somewhat. Oh, I understand he meant to say that I am beautiful. Not exactly that. What then? That you are young, that you are tender, and that you would be excellent to eat. What? To eat? Yes, undoubtedly. The Maoris, you know, are cannibals. It's evident, given the immediacy and physicality of the incident, that the eye of reason in Montaigne's binary continues to be dominated by common report, derived from vulgar opinion. The shock for her comes the next day, because standing on the balcony of her hotel, she sees the Maori making their way to Mass. And this prompts the disconcerted observation, they have embraced Catholicism while remaining cannibals. The spectre of cannibalism continues to disturb the narrative of the journal. Each occasion marked by a tension between the eye of reason and common report. The latter, common report, retaining its power as the dominant term in the binary. While in Auckland, she learns that Major Wilmot, Sir Edley Wilmot's son, and Captain Williamson have been captured, killed, and eaten by the Maori. That's on page 74. The news affects her deeply, as Sir Edley had been kind to her when she was living in Tasmania. Nevertheless, she persuades her husband to hire a guide, and they make a short journey inland to a Maori pa. As fascinated as she is by seeing Maori in their natural state, she cannot prevent a recollection of the murder of Marc-Joseph Marion du Fresne, aka Marion du Fresne, and 26 of his crew, killed on the 12th of June, 1772, triggering the fear that she and her husband someday might be killed, that they might kill her and roast me as they did Captain Marion. Journal, page 77. Time to leave, she says to her husband, and so they take the ship to Tahiti. Arriving at the Marquesas, where they find the inhabitants of Nuku'hiva at war with the Tapu Kai, Madame Giovanni's one-line droll observation is, they're all cannibals and eat one another whenever and wherever possible. Journal, page 98. And while there, they meet a native chief named Pakoko, who gives them a detailed, gory account of the correct way to butcher a human body before eating it. Now, it's before lunch. I won't read it. It's not on a slide. But if you're interested and you're feeling particularly ghoulish, you'll be able to read it. But the way she just inserts it into her journal is very much in the terms of the French diet and a French menu. So, killing to eat, as Montaigne points out in his journal, as an act of revenge, may be no less barbaric than drawing and quartering and hanging and racking, activities Europeans consider just punishment. As Montaigne observes, we may then call these people savages, barbarous, in respect to the rules of reason, but not in respect to ourselves, who in all sorts of barbarity exceed them. And I'm very much reminded of Foucault's Discipline and Punishment. For Madame Giovanni, an awareness and sort of growing sense of this troubles her. And she comes to admit, having been stranded on the top of Mount Wellington in winter without food for 48 hours as part of an adventure, and then being offered kangaroo steaks to eat, she remarks in her journal, "Now I understand the cannibalism of my good friends, the Maori, the New Zealanders." That's page 41. The eye of reason, it seems, threatens to deconstruct common report. Perhaps a corollary of her insight into hunger is that cannibalism should not be included in her narrative until it has been verified by the eye of reason. But that proves not to be the case. Still in search of commercial opportunities, the Giovannis now decide to visit New Caledonia. Readers of the journal, given its title, Madame Giovanni en Australie, ou les Macayas, à Tahiti, à la Nouvelle-Calédonie, en Californie, et au Mexique, could reasonably expect an accurate, detailed, first-hand account of the places, people, customs, and beliefs of the people of New Caledonia. But this does not happen. The Giovannis arrive at Baled in the north of New Caledonia in December 1850. A Catholic mission had been established there in 1843. The purpose of the Giovanni voyage is to see whether it's possible to open a trade in sandalwood. But they are warned not to go ashore by the local priest. In her journal, she reports that the natives are crass cannibals. Page 100. Several days before their arrival, a French naval officer, Monsieur de Varenne, and most of his crew had been massacred when they ventured ashore for fresh water. So the ship on which the Giovannis are passengers stands off for 5 weeks. Madame Giovanni remains in her cabin. So the ship, on which the Giovanni's passengers stands off for 5 weeks. Madame Giovanni remains in her cabin or promenades on the deck, while her husband makes 2 cautious forays on land. He could have supplied her with copy, but evidently he doesn't. For the first and only time in her journal, Madame Giovanni surrenders her voice to another narrator, clearly signalled in the text as one of the eyewitnesses of this tragedy now told us the hideous details as follows. For greater accuracy, we shall let him tell the story. So what follows is a graphic 5-page account, approximately 5% of the text to that point, of the fate of Monsieur de Varenne and 12 of his crew, killed, butchered and eaten. All this has been witnessed by 3 of the crew who've been kept as prisoners. Eventually they're rescued by a priest armed only with his rosary. They're brought aboard the Alchem, the warship, with 2 of the chiefs who led the massacre. The chiefs are sketched. Madame Giovanni is given a copy of the portraits, and then the chiefs are summarily executed. At this point, Madame Giovanni's journal returns to its first-person narrative with the one sentence that marks the end of the chapter on New Caledonia. It is simply, 3 days later, we sailed for Tahiti. The next chapter 9 begins, we returned to Tahiti, convinced, as I've already said, that there was no business opportunities in the Isles of Pine and New Caledonia, except in the marketing of produce. And I felt, as at that moment when the good Maori of New Zealand pinched my arm when he said, "Maki," that my avocation did not lie in that direction. So the fear of being eaten. Bien sûr, you may say. So what? Surely this journal is simply another vignette of the European conquest of the Pacific. And who is this Madame Giovanni, with her preoccupation with native savagery and cannibalism, that we should pay so much attention to her account of her travels, particularly when she claims she's visited New Caledonia when in actual fact she didn't? Or has she actually made that claim? Because the title specifically says, la Nouvelle-Calédonie. That is, to New Caledonia. Firstly, most of the references to cannibalism in the text are associated with places she does not visit, or with people and events relayed to her as hearsay. So in the journal, cannibalism functions as a trope drawn from a discourse that is as ancient as the Romans' accounts of the Scythians. It's a trope that drives the narrative, that writes Madame Giovanni when she is unable to employ the eye of reason. It automatically provides her with a way of describing a native or indigenous other that has resisted or is resisting a negotiated exploitation of world's resources, a negotiation that is as old as, if not older than, the Treaty of Tordesillas. And the remedy for combating or nullifying such resistance is to have the trope of cannibalism speak for it. Cannibalism thus delineates the boundary between civilization and savagery, a boundary that shifts as civilization, sanctioned by the doctrine of discovery, prosecutes its righteous trade war of extermination against resistant non-Christians. Here, as Madame Giovanni tries to point out, the French are morally superior to the materialistic English because they've encouraged and protected post-revolution Catholic missions committed to promoting Christianity in New Caledonia. So conversion as a form of subjection is being offered as an alternative to annihilation. But the Maori deconstruct all of this. She has told the Maori, you know they are cannibals, but she's observed them going to mess. Beside the good Maori who pinches her arm, has done so with a twinkle in his eye, a twinkle that hints at irony, mischief, or a play on credulity, or all three. I'd like to suggest that three conclusions present themselves from this. Firstly, to attribute cannibalism to savages in travel literature is to use a time-honoured means of expressing otherness that has not been scrutinised by the eye of reason. Resorting to common report, vulgar opinion, or second-hand eyewitness accounts violates an implied first-person narrative promised by travel literature that, quote, I'm about to describe what I saw, that contract between the writer and the reader. Secondly, the place in New Caledonia which Madame Giovanni intended to visit is of very significant historic interest. It is the site where James Cook first visited New Caledonia in 1774, where the Bucafal landed the priests to establish a Catholic mission in 1843. A church still exists in the village. It is also where Admiral Auguste Fevrier d'Espoin disembarked from the ship Le Phoque to take possession of New Caledonia for France in the name of Napoleon III on the 24th of September 1853, 3 years after Madame Giovanni had left and 2 years before Alexander Dumas edited and published her journal. It would have been illuminating to have an account of the customs and manners of the local people by such a precise, confident, shrewd observer. Finally, who was this Madame Giovanni? Is she the aristocratic French woman who attracted attention at government house balls in Tasmania, in Melbourne, in Sydney, who seemed to conduct herself with enormous self-confidence? For nearly half a century, her identity has remained a secret, as she asked Alexander Dumas to remove or conceal anything in the narrative that might identify her. So it was not until Douglas Wilkie's meticulous research for a series of articles published between 2011 and 2016 that she was conclusively identified as a highly attractive French woman, most likely born in Otago, named Caligari, who had been arrested in London for defrauding the city's jewellers and sentenced to 10 years transportation to Van Diemen's Land. During her lifetime, one of celebrity and adventure as she travelled widely, she would employ at least 15 aliases. I have a list of them all, but that would require 3 screens to put them up. So, but I do, if you want to have a look how often she changed her name. How, one might ask, could a notorious fraudster write an accurate travel narrative? Yet scholarship has established that that is exactly what has happened. But what she says about cannibalism, of course, is another matter. More the pity, then, that we've not been able to enjoy her description of New Caledonia and its people at such a significant point in its history. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, for this wonderful paper. I loved it. So do you have questions?
Thank you very much for your talk. It was really interesting. And while you were talking, I was thinking of, why do you think there is this fascination surrounding cannibalism? And actually, I have two questions. And do you think this vision has changed over time? So first question, do you think there is why do you think there is this fascination around cannibalism and this vision? Has this vision changed? Sorry.
I was very, very fortunate to be able to discover that there has been a symposium conducted by the Research Institute here, because I have 3 children, and the 3 of them are academics. And when I said what I was going to talk about in New Caledonia, they said, "Dad, don't do that. People will be offended. And besides, that's, outdated. That's an old idea." But I think one of the really important things to remember is that even though it may not be something which has which is popularly thought about, it still functions as a trope in terms of appropriation, because what it has to do, as with, say, the seizure of land or the appropriation of space as part of a whole imperial project, is the sense of the dismemberment and disappearance, the consumption of the indigenous. So even though it may not function literally in terms of somebody eating somebody, there is nevertheless the devouring, which is still very much taking place. And so consequently, it might not be necessarily in a literal sense, but it's certainly functioning in a symbolic sense. But I quickly sat down and read as much as I could of the book, and I must say thank you very, very much. And the nice part about it was it kept me awake. I didn't fall asleep. Absolutely fascinating. But it will answer your question in much more detail than I can. Unfortunately, it doesn't mention Madame Giovanni. But, she wasn't a scientist, she wasn't a philosopher, she wasn't an anthropologist. She did write brilliantly, and I can understand why Dumas edited her book and published it.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm quite sad that we didn't get in touch with you prior to the symposium a couple of years ago. Anyway, for your interest, so the book just came out. It will be available soon. But if you want to go to the YouTube channel, to the university's YouTube channel, you can find all the presentations from that symposium. They're still online, and you can have access to all of them. This is just a selection of the papers. Not all of the presentations are in this book anyway. So it might be also of interest to you to have a look at the diversity of the presentations. It was in 2021, so during COVID time, it was like a secluded, mainly online symposium at the time. I was unaware of this this beautiful sentence by Montaigne, which you showed us. And it made me think of one that I used in the chapter that I wrote in this book by a French anarchist whose name was Charles Malato. And Charles Malato once said he had been in New Caledonia for several years, and he was one of the very few French colonists at the time who was not really supportive of the Kanak insurrection of 1878, but at least he was. He applied some understanding to the reasons behind it and behind the Kanak upheaval of 1878. And he was comparing Kanak traditional society, where he thought people were actually indeed probably cannibals at some point in time. And especially they would eat, according to him, the corpses of the people which had been killed in traditional tribal wars. And he was comparing that to the colonial process that was actually taking place. And Kanak people were getting more and more sick, and because of, European introduced diseases and so on. And he had this phrase, which I think epitomizes the problematic and echoes very much your Montaigne quote. It's, what is worse, eating the people you've killed, as in the tribal killings, or killing the people who don't want to die?
Yes, yes. Yep.
Yeah, let's do it again.
I think actually the Montaigne essay is quoted in the book. Yes, at some point, yes. Because that helped pleased me enormously when I came across it. But having the book is something I will take back to my children and just say, there you are.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Kuch. I saw a text that talk about Mari. Can you explain the link with Madame Giovanni? Someone to translate, please?
No, yes. She spends quite a lot of time in New Zealand, and I was asked to be the first professor of Irish studies in New Zealand. So I lived and taught at the University of Otago for 13 years. And my favourite interaction was with the Maori students. In fact, I was asked to deliver their graduation ceremony, which meant 120 hongi at the end of the ceremony. That's nose to nose greeting. They have, similar to the Australian Aborigine, a very strong sense of irony and a great ability to read you, to see the type of person you are. And I think one of my favourite episodes was a knock on my office door shortly after I was appointed. I opened it, and here was this very large Maori with leathers and chains and tattoos. And he said to me, I want a Irish design tattoo. So I knew the library had a facsimile of the Book of Kells. And my office was on one corner of the central part of the campus, and the library was on the other, which meant I had to walk through the campus past the administrative buildings. And it pleased me greatly to walk alongside this bikie who I turned out to be a member of the mongrel mob, and go to the library and ask the librarian for the Book of Kells and for us to flip through and find a design for a tattoo. So reading that section of Madame Giovanni's journal, I was really aware of the fact that the interaction would have been one of him testing her. She was presenting herself as a person who had mana, who had status. He just wanted to see whether or not it was actual.
One
question for you.
Sorry.
This isn't my question, it's my friend's question, but a bit too shy to ask it. How was this book received in Europe, specifically in regards to the theme of cannibalism throughout it?
I wish I could answer your question. I do know that it was Dumas was extremely prolific. He published a lot. I'm pretty sure, because it's been reissued a number of times, that it would have been reasonably popular. But I think what you may have gained already from the symposium is that there was a huge amount of travel literature that was published from the 1840s through to the 1870s and then subsequently. So exactly how big an impact it made, I don't know. Part of the problem, I suspect, would have been that nobody knew who this Madame Giovanni was. I came across it because of, I'm writing a book on the performance of Irish theatre in Australia from 1789 to 1920. And I keep coming across references of French people and French actors and actresses and French theatre companies in Australia. And I noticed that this woman had been remarked because of the way she dressed at a mayoral ball in the late 1840s.
A short question. Do you have the list for the 15 aliases for Mrs. Callery from Otago? I'm very interested in the 15 aliases, the false name. You've got that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I've got them all. So very short.
Within this book?
No, in here.
Okay. Okay. I'm very interested in those names. Yes,
so
please.
Very short answer. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.